Hello and welcome to Strategic News International. I'm Parul Chandra and I have with me today the Ambassador of Thailand to India, Chutintorn Gongsakdi. Ambassador Gongsakdi will be talking to SNI about the upcoming ASEAN Summit in Thailand. Thailand has been the chair of ASEAN for the last 1 year, and therefore we decided to have a chat with Ambassador Gongsakdi on the importance of ASEAN. Welcome to SNI, Ambassador Gongsakdi.
Yes, hello.
And lovely to meet you again.
Good to see you too.
Let me begin by asking you, what has been the year like for Thailand as the chair of ASEAN?
First of all, I'm sure, the people in Bangkok are counting down the days, the hours and the minutes, to the time on the 4th when they can hand over the chairmanship to Vietnam. And it'll be another 10 years before we chair ASEAN again. And we're very proud, that we've managed, everything quite well so far. As people would say, we've achieved more than a lot of people probably expected. Don't forget that, like India, we also had our general elections this year. But the secret to everything is that the preparations for the ASEAN Summit, the ASEAN Summit and the ASEAN Year 2019 began, long before 2019 itself. And everything was in place, the plans and so on, so that during this year we could afford to deal only with, fighting any fires that may have come up. I mentioned just now that this year is probably more than a lot of people expected. And some of the achievements that, the main highlights are, for example, the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific.
Yes, very important.
We needed to come up with that. You cannot take for granted that, it will come out. But we had our discussions and we managed to find consensus, because a lot of some members of ASEAN felt, why do we have to look at the region, from somebody else's perspective, like Indo-Pacific and so on and so forth. But in the end, we managed to find consensus in ASEAN and came up with the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which will be a platform whereby we can engage, all the relevant countries in the region. And I think overall, nobody has questioned ASEAN's centrality, which of course we like. So it's, I think it might be similar to Indian concept of, okay, so we have house party and everyone is welcome. The other thing which, if, as I pray, we can achieve it, that would be great, which is the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. But as I've told everyone around me, even if we don't conclude it this year, we would have taken it very, very far from the beginning of the year until now. I mean, look at how India has engaged, deeply, domestically, all the stakeholders and so on. So now we're just working on the remaining difficult issues, which still center around India's deficit and mainly with China. And we have heard from Indian stakeholders that the challenge of RCEP for India is the 3 countries that India does not have FTA with, which is Australia, New Zealand, and China. And of course, China, with which India has the largest trade deficit. So if we can achieve RCEP, that would be such a boost, to global economy, regional trade, and I believe that other things will follow from there. We are also due to have ASEANIndia FTA review, which is something that India has been calling for about 5 years. I believe that the turning point came when we had the ASEAN Troika here in Delhi in July to talk about RCEP. And we came to understand many things, but one point was the massive deficit, that India is having to face. So that's one area we worked on. But the other one, your Minister Shri Piyush Goyal mentioned that how can we have confidence in the wording in any new agreement when an existing agreement which has a revision clause, we haven't been able to get a revision for 5 years. After India has asked, there's been no positive response. So I think that meeting had something to do with it as well. So when people meet face to face and talk, good things happen. Then of course, Thailand's theme for this year's Partnership for Sustainability. So we have, leaders' vision statement on sustainability. We have Center for Capacity Building for Sustainability, Sustainable Development, and so on and so forth. These will be deliverables that add to the quality of life. Thailand, perhaps, we haven't been focusing on areas that people see as more concrete, like trade and so on and so forth, but sustainability, sustainable development is important too. And that will deliver in the long term for ASEAN community.
You mentioned RCEP and India, particularly the Indian industry, has huge reservations about it, and it is the reason why India has not yet got on to this agreement. Now, is RCEP also going to be discussed at the ASEAN meet in early November?
Whereas in the past, when you hear about RCEP, you'll hear deadlines and then slippage. Okay, here what you will hear is extended meetings, another set of meetings, and so on. So people are trying very hard to use, what time remains until the summit to try and have a conclusion. But even so, there will be, at the moment as we speak, there's an officials meeting, okay, in Thailand. But then there will be ministerial level and also leaders level meeting, ASEP Summit. If a deal will be made or announced, it will be announced at the summit. But, and if you read between the lines, different interviews by like ASEAN Secretary General, or reading some articles where officials, they will let slip that if it's not concluded at the summit, it can still be concluded by the end of this year or beginning of next year. And from as early as July or even before, the then acting Minister of Commerce of Thailand had said landing zone would be something like announcing a substantial conclusion of RCEP this year, and then maybe continuing with market access negotiations next year. But what I want to emphasize is that we've reached a point beyond which we have ever, reached with RCEP negotiations, with FTA negotiations with India. So I hope that momentum is not lost, okay? Even if optically we cannot do it this year, I hope that we continue the hard work. Number two, on top of that, we have the ASEAN-India FTA, which we can discuss further. And I'm hoping that if those two leads India to have, more comfort and confidence, and then we can complete the Thai-India FTA, do a BIMSTEC FTA, and so on.
Yeah, but India, as I said, does have reservations about it, and it is also under huge pressure from ASEAN countries to sign on the dotted line. And hopefully some kind of common ground will be found between ASEAN and India?
I think if you follow the negotiations, the main thing is what can India do if after signing RCEP, a massive surge of imports comes in.
Yes, especially from
and
China.
And those are the areas where we are working on, maybe a special mechanism or something for India. But then something for India must not be to the detriment of others as well. I mean, the whole idea of FTA is to have fair trade, and, fair opportunities as well. So it's not all about India, but it's not all about China or all about ASEAN either. But the idea is to have increased market openings, opportunities, and then, a bigger cake for everyone. And of course, there are always sectors in the economy that have to, bear the brunt or have to adjust. And there are ways to deal with them, structural adjustment funds and so on and so forth. Everyone has to face that.
Ambassador Gongsakdi, you also mentioned the Indo-Pacific Outlook, which the ASEAN grouping came out with a few months ago. Now, can it be seen as something to counter China? My second question is, you also are, ASEAN countries have also been working on a code of conduct for the South China Sea with China.
Yes.
And there hasn't been a consensus yet on it. So the negotiations have been somewhat difficult. So what would you like to say on these two issues?
So first, Thailand ASEAN, but particularly Thailand has never seen the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific as being against one power, regional power or global power, as opposed to the others. You have to understand that no matter how you define the Indo-Pacific, whether it goes to the African coast or not, we are kind of like one of the big hubs there, okay? So that's why we say, ASEAN centrality and so on. But, and then everyone seems to have an interest in that region. Yes, China, US, India, and, other regional powers, Australia, and so on, even the Europeans, because however you look at it, ASEAN is an important sub-region, as part of the bigger Asian continent. So everyone wants to engage, and what we've been trying to do basically is to balance all the regional and global players against each other in our region. And ASEAN centrality means that you can come and talk and engage with each other using our structures, our meeting structures and so on. And I know that the way ASEAN thinks is that, and also Thailand, if we can talk to everyone, maybe we can make everyone get along better. And that's the whole philosophy, And also in our past, Thailand's past, we have made friends with power players so that somehow they counterbalance each other, India will think we're friends with China. China thinks we're friends with US, and so on. And later India will come to play the Russians and so on, And that kind of keeps everything maybe not like as flat as an iced over lake, but it keeps everyone in their corner.
Yeah.
And then if we can cooperate with each of them in a way that they maybe compete with each other a little, for influence, for so on, without using, force and arms and so on. I think that's a positive thing. So the whole thing about the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific is that we are able to engage everyone without openly, taking sides, because that's not what we want to do. I mean, we can't go up against India. We can't go up against China. We can't go up against, US. or Russians, and we don't want to. We feel that everyone can work together there, and that's the whole idea. But one thing between India and ASEAN is that the principles in the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific also coincide with India. Freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight, international law of the sea, and so on and so forth. Where the details are a little bit more, different are things like, so India wants to engage ASEAN in more military cooperation. They want to patrol the Malacca Straits. They want to engage in Cobra Gold exercise that we do with the US and so on and so forth. That's where it's like negotiating.
So the security dimension of
the security dimension is not a problem, but when where the powers start to overlap or touch on each other, these are the areas, the details that we have to work on. How, in which way is everyone happy, and so on and so forth. If we did, for example, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, everyone's happy with that. But when you start having hardware and so on, there are what we think are trust issues, interoperability, and so on and so forth. So those will come with time. And that's how we are in the middle, because you're talking about our region and we talk to everyone. So countries can talk to us, and then we go and ask the other side, and we find some common ground. For example, like humanitarian assistance, disaster relief is an area that everyone is comfortable with. Another one is military medicine, which is okay, but like joint patrols, we've had
it's a no-no?
No, it's not a no-no. Like this year we did Singapore, Thailand, India. Yes, that's an achievement of this year. And in fact, we've asked India, what do you think about Singapore, Thailand, India, China? But
that's
you see,
interesting.
Yeah, but
so what has been the response?
Sitting here, let's say, I'm from Thailand, you're from India. I think it's more difficult for you than for Singapore, Thailand to, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's the kind of our engagement in the Indo-Pacific.
So has India got back to Thailand?
No, it's just something that we've thrown, because as small nations, we're used to engaging everyone, and then we know the parties, and then we have a sense of, what may be possible with a stretch. See? And even this Singapore, Thailand, India naval exercise, we had the help of, India would like it. India exercises with Singapore. And then somehow you two came up with the idea and started lobbying us. It didn't seem easy at first for us, but over time, with various cocktail receptions and so on, National Day receptions, this is what happens,
So that's what happens at National Day
receptions,
receptions,
not only selling insurance and car rental companies and hotels. Yes, that's traditionally how cocktail receptions are used for. And eventually, yes, and we did it. And now we're looking at what's next.
Ambassador Gongsakdi, one final question.
Yeah, sure.
You just mentioned humanitarian assistance. Now, the Rohingya issue is one that is really a serious one for the refugees. And the ASEAN ministerial meeting, which was held, I think, about 3 months ago, they came out with a statement in which they have given a lot of attention to this issue, saying that, well, we need to assist Myanmar in taking back these refugees. But there seems to be some amount of reluctance on the part of the Rohingyas themselves to go back to the Rakhine state because they feel that their lives will be in danger. So what role is ASEAN playing in this matter?
This is such a big question. But let me just say that there's going to be an East Asia Summit, okay, EAS. EAS Summit traditionally doesn't have an agenda. Okay, so any of the leaders can speak about regional issues. One country asked us, actually your country, asked us, are we going to discuss the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific? From our perspective, we say it's not a fixed, we're not expecting that, but if you can talk about anything you want. But we feel that everything is clear and so on and so forth. Now, coming back to the Rohingya issue, that is getting a lot of traction, not only in ASEAN, but in the UN General Assembly and so on and so forth, right? But one of the fundamental principles in ASEAN is non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. That is one principle which will make or break ASEAN. But with whatever you call it, our friendship, our familiarity, Myanmar has allowed, ASEAN missions to go in, to look at the situation on the ground and so on and so forth. I think there's a willingness of Myanmar to repatriate, to have, the Rohingyas coming back. And India has built homes, which is, I think it's a fantastic gesture, but the key is still to determine, who is from where and, whether they want to come back, whether they were from Myanmar and they want to come back. But some of the conditions that people have been speaking for ages is if they come back, they have to have the same status as everyone else or every other, racial group that lives in Myanmar. They have to be free to travel within the country like any other Myanmarese person and so on. So there are, I think what we're waiting for is the first group, okay? And I read every day, about things like let some of the leaders go, from Bangladesh, from the Rohingya people go back to Myanmar to see what the conditions are like. People have fear. It's not easy, it's not like moving from Delhi to Mumbai, but there's enough goodwill and tension at the same time. But we feel that in the ASEAN way, there remains a dialogue. Let me say which one is easier. I think RCEP may be slightly easier because there we're talking about rupees and pesos, right? But with the Rohingya, it's race, and people. India's gone through that before, but it can be done.
So several difficult issues that need to be dealt with by the ASEAN.
Yeah, and then, of course, hand it over to Vietnam. But we will still work together,
On that note, thank you so much for talking to SNI Ambassador Gongsakdi.
Okay, thank you.